The throne on which the Empress is seated represents, as we have said, the role of sacred magic in the world. It is its place in the world and in the history of the world. It is, lastly, its basis. In other words, it is that which attends it, desires it, and is always ready to receive it. What is this? In view of the liberating function of sacred magic, it is all that which is deprived of liberty and is bound by necessity. Concerning this, St. Paul says, quote, "For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not of its own will, but by the will of him who subjected it in hope. Because the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to decay and obtain the glorious liberty of the children of God. We know that the whole creation has been groaning in travail together until now, and not only the creation, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly as we wait for adoption, as sons, the redemption of our bodies." Romans 8:19-23. It is therefore the mineral, plant, animal, and human realms of nature, in a word, nature in its entirety, which constitute the domain of sacred magic. The reason for the existence of sacred magic stems from the fall and the whole domain of the fall, comprising fallen nature, fallen man, and the fallen hierarchies. These are the beings belonging to it who hope with eager longing to be set free from its bondage to decay and obtain the glorious liberty of the children of God. How does sacred magic operate towards this end? How, for example, does it deliver man? The throne of the Empress has a back. It strongly resembles two wings, so that certain interpreters of the tarot have seen the Empress as being winged. Others, however, see only a back. In view of the context of the card, the meaning of the coat of arms bearing the eagle, the sceptre surmounted by the cross, and the two-layered crown, could one not see the back here in the form of two petrified and immobilized wings, but which had once been genuine wings, and which are again potentially so? If this interpretation is accepted, not only would it reconcile the two apparently opposing points of view, but also it would agree with all that the card teaches about the sphere, the aim, the power, and the legitimacy of sacred magic. To give movement to the petrified wings. Would this not be in accord with the liberating mission of sacred magic and with the words of St. Paul? Whatever it may be, this interpretation comprises the answer to the question as to the concrete mode of the liberating action of sacred magic. It is in every way contrary to the action of constraint of false or personal magic. It sets in opposition to the action of hypnosis, the waking of the free will, and to suggestion, the deliverance from possession by fixed ideas and psychopathological complexes. It sets in opposition to evocation by necromancy, the ascent towards the deceased effected by the force of love, and to the means of constraint employed by ceremonial magic with respect to elemental beings, gnomes, undines, sylphs, and salamanders, the gain of their confidence and friendship by corresponding acts. It places in opposition to the procedures of the practical Kabbalah, which have the aim of subjugating evil spirits, in the sense of the fallen hierarchies, their transformation into servants through their own accord by resisting to the special temptation of each of them. For they also are waiting for the revealing of the sons of God, and this revealing signifies for them, in the first place, inaccessibility to their temptations. Resist the devil, and the devil will be your friend. A devil is not an atheist, he does not doubt God. The faith which he lacks is faith in man, and the act of sacred magic with respect to such a devil is that of re-establishing his faith in man. The purpose of the trials of Job was not to dispel the doubts of God, but rather those of the devil. Those doubts once dispelled, who was it who then laboured to give to Job all that he had lost, if not the same being who had formerly deprived him of everything? Job's enemy became his voluntary servant, and voluntary servant means to say friend. Sacred magic, finally, in place of the fluidic transfusion of magnetism, practices the taking upon oneself of the illnesses and infirmities of others, according to St. Paul's precept. Quote, "Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ." Galatians 6:2. It is in this way that saints practice sacred magic. They would not project their forces, their vitality, or their fluids into someone else, but on the contrary would rather take from him that which was unhealthy in him. Saint Lidvina, for example, who never left her bed or her room for many long years, once smelt strongly of alcohol. At the same time, the cure of an alcoholic was effected in the town, Schiedam, where she lived. Having advanced this list of contraries, I do not have the intention of judging, still less of condemning, hypnosis, magnetism, suggestion, all evocation, ceremonial magic dealing with nature, and practical Kabbalah aspiring to the subjugation of evil spirits. The sole aim here is to make clear that which differentiates sacred magic from these practices. They can also serve the good, but sacred magic can do nothing else than to serve the good. Are there grimoires of sacred magic? Yes, if one understands by grimoire an arsenal of arms or implements which one makes use of. This arsenal is composed of formulae, gestures, and figures reproduced by the gestures. But one must not choose them arbitrarily. The choice must be reserved either according to profound knowledge confirmed by revelation, or otherwise to direct revelation confirmed subsequently by the knowledge of experience. With regard to the arsenal of formulae, it is accessible almost entirely to everyone, for the principal source of the formulae of sacred magic is the Holy Scripture, the Bible, comprising the New and Old Testaments. The Gospel according to St. John occupies a prominent place here, for it consists almost completely of magical formulae. Then come the three other Gospels and the Apocalypse, or Book of Revelation. One also finds magical formulae in the Epistles and in the Acts of the Apostles. As for the Old Testament, one finds them above all in the Psalms, the Book of Genesis, Bereshith, Ezekiel, and the other prophets. There are also the magical formulae in the liturgical ritual of the Church and in the written or oral tradition leading back to the saints and to the great mystics. Equally, the text of the Emerald Table belongs to the arsenal of formulae of sacred magic. Concerning the silent part, i.e. the gestures and figures reproduced by gestures of sacred magic, their choice must be in the same way either confirmed by revelation or indicated by it. They consist, as a rule, of the ritual gestures employed by the traditional church, Roman or Greek Orthodox, and of gestures reproducing a certain number of geometrical figures. Thus it is necessary sometimes to kneel down, sometimes to be upright, sometimes to prostrate oneself, sometimes it is necessary to do the gesture of benediction, sometimes that of protection, or that of liberation, etc. These formulae and gestures are not secret, but one should not betray them. To betray does not signify to divulge them, to make them known to others. One does not betray a magical formulae which is known to nearly everyone solely by the fact of making it known to others. But one betrays it when one uproots it from its proper sacred ground and from the sacred context of the magical operation to which it belongs, and when one brings it down to a lower plane, i.e. when one abuses it. It is the same as with the formulae by means of which consecration operates in the Mass. Everyone knows them, but they operate only when they are pronounced in the sacred context of the Mass by a person who is alone legitimately authorized to do it. It is not secrecy which enables their operation. It is the context and it is the niveau of the operation, and it is the legitimacy of the operant or celebrant. Therefore, one does not betray the formulae of consecration by printing them in the missals, but one certainly would betray them if one were to use them as a layman, in an arbitrarily improvised or invented Mass. The mystery is protected in another way than the secret. Its protection is its light, whilst the protection of a secret is its obscurity. As for an arcanum, which is a middle degree between the mystery and the secret, it is the twilight which protects it, for it reveals itself and hides itself at the same time by means of symbolism. Symbolism is a twilight for arcana. Thus the arcana of the tarot are formulae rendered visible and accessible to everyone. They were entertaining in the past for thousands of people, they were used for telling fortunes by hundreds of people, a few experienced in them a revelatory effect. Court de Gibelin was astonished by them, Eliphas Levi was captivated by them, Papou was inspired by them, others followed them and became subject to the strange and almost irresistible attraction of the tarot. They studied it, meditated, and commented upon it, and interpreted it, being stimulated, inspired, and illumined by something in the tarot, which simultaneously reveals itself and hides itself in the twilight of its symbols. And ourselves? Where do we stand in relation to the tarot? We shall have a sure knowledge of this after the 22nd letter, dedicated to the minor arcana of the tarot. The throne on which the Empress is seated represents the second hay of the tetragrammaton of sacred magic, i.e. its manifested entirety. Her crown corresponds to Yod, the scepter to the first hay, and the coat of arms to the vow of the tetragrammaton. This is why we have defined the throne as the role of sacred magic in the world and in history. One could equally say that it is the phenomenon of the whole of sacred magic as it has manifested itself, as it is manifesting itself, and as it will manifest itself in the history of mankind. It is its historical body which reveals its soul and spirit. By body I mean that which makes possible direct action in the world of facts. Thus the arsenal or store of magical formulae and gestures which one uses in the practical exercise of sacred magic are part of its body. The rituals of its universal operations, destined to serve the whole of mankind and transcending space and time, i.e. the 7 sacraments of the universal church, insofar as they are rituals, are equally part of its body. Then those who have the mission or the ability to perpetuate the tradition of sacred magic are likewise part of it. This body is like a tree which has a certain number of branches which bear many leaves, but whose roots are in heaven and whose top is turned downwards. It has only one trunk and a sap which nourishes and vivifies all its branches with their innumerable leaves. Is this the tree of the Sephiroth of the Kabbalah, or rather the tree of knowledge of good and evil, or, again, the tree of life? The fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil has had a triple effect: toil, suffering, and death. Toil or work took the place of mystical union with God, which union without effort is the teaching of the first arcanum of the tarot, the magician. Suffering replaced the directly reflected revelation or gnosis, whose direct revelation is the teaching of the second arcanum of the tarot, the high priestess. And death entered into the domain of life or creative sacred magic, which is the teaching of the third arcanum of the tarot, the Empress. For sacred magic is that life which was before the fall. The gnosis of the second arcanum is that consciousness which was before the fall. And the mystical spontaneity of the first arcanum is that relationship between man and God which was before the fall. This primordial spontaneity gave the impulse and direction to evolution and the development of the human being. It was not the struggle for existence described by Charles Darwin a century ago, which was the fundamental directing impulse towards the ideal or aim of evolution before the fall, but rather that state of being which we designate today by the term mystical union. The principle of struggle or toil, effort, only came into play after the fall. Similarly, suffering did not play the role of awakening consciousness before the time of the fall. This role was then reserved for directly reflected revelation or gnosis. Neither did death then play the role of liberating consciousness through the destruction of the forms which enclose it, that it has played since the fall. Instead of the destruction of forms, their continual transformation took place. This was operated by the perpetual action of life affecting the metamorphosis of forms in conformity with changes in the consciousness using them. This perpetually liberating, constructive action of life was, and still is, the function of sacred or divine magic. And it is this transforming function, opposed to the destructive function of death, that Moses' Genesis designates by the symbol of the tree of life. For the fall changed the destiny of humanity, so that mystical union became replaced by struggle or toil, gnosis by suffering, and sacred magic by death. This is why the formula announcing the good news that the effects of the fall can be overcome and that the way of human evolution can return to that of mystical union instead of struggle, that immediately reflected revelation or gnosis can replace the teaching of the truth through suffering, and that sacred magic or transforming life can take the place of destructive death. This is why I say this formula has the tenor of the following: I am the way, the truth, and the life. John 14:6. This formula is at the same time the summation of the first three arcana of the tarot, i.e. the arcanum of the true way or mystical spontaneity, the arcanum of revealed truth or gnosis, and the arcanum of transforming life or sacred magic. Sacred magic is therefore the tree of life, inaccessible to arbitrary foolhardiness, but manifesting itself in the whole history of mankind by the agency of those who know how to say, Enque ancilla Domini mihi fiat secundum verbum tuum. Luke 1:38. Behold, I am the handmaid of the Lord, let it be to me according to your word. Or rather, Ecce servus Domini, faciem secundum verbum tuum. Behold, the servant of the Lord, I will do according to your word. It manifests itself in human history by a miracle, namely that human suprabiological life continues from century to century, from millennium to millennium, and its source does not dry up, that the sacred fire above the altars of hearts and the altars of stone is not extinguished from century to century, from millennium to millennium, that goodness, truth, and beauty do not lose their attraction from century to century, that, in spite of all, there is faith, hope, and charity in the world, that there are saints, sages, geniuses, benefactors, and healers, that pure thought, poetry, music, and prayer are not being engulfed by the void, that there is this universal miracle of human history, and that the miraculous exists. Yes, the miraculous does exist, for life is only a series of miracles, if we understand by miracle not the absence of cause, i.e. that it would not be caused by anyone or anything, which would be more the concept of pure chance, but rather the visible effect of an invisible cause, or the effect on a lower plane due to a cause on a higher plane. Incomprehensibility is not at all the distinctive quality of a miracle. On the contrary, a miracle is often essentially more comprehensible than a so-called natural and explained phenomenon. It is, for example, more comprehensible that Theresa Neumann in Bavaria lived for decades without any food other than the host, in view of the fact that matter is only condensed energy and energy is only condensed consciousness, than the well-explained fact of a single cell, which, in multiplying itself by division, produces quite different cells for the brain, muscles, bones, hair, etc., which group themselves in such a way that the result is a complete human or animal organism. When someone tells me that all this is explained by heredity, that such are the genes contained within the first cell that it results in such an organism, then I nod in agreement, but I am completely hoodwinked. The tree of life is the source of the miracles of generation, transformation, rejuvenation, healing, and liberation. Conscious participation with it, ad perpetranda miracula re unius, as the Emerald Table expresses it, is the great work of sacred magic. One can understand the idea of the great work when one compares it with the ideal of modern exact science. For the idea of science is power, practical technical power and intellectual technical power. The intellectual aspect of the scientific ideal is to reduce the multiplicity of phenomena to a limited number of laws and then reduce these to a single simple formula. It is a matter, in the last analysis, of mechanizing the internet in such a manner that it calculates the world instead of understanding it. Then one would attain intellectual technical power. The practical aspect of the scientific ideal is revealed in the progress of modern science from the 18th century to the present day. Its essential stages are the discoveries and putting into man's service, successively, of steam, electricity, and atomic energy. But as different as these appear to be, these discoveries are based only on a single principle, namely the principle of the destruction of matter, by which energy is freed in order to be captured anew by man so as to be put at his service. It is so with the little regular explosions of petrol which produce the energy to drive a car. And it is so with the destruction of atoms, by means of the technique of neutron bombardment which produces atomic energy. That it is a matter of coal, petrol, or hydrogen atoms is not important. It is always a case of the production of energy as a consequence of the destruction of matter. For the practical aspect of the scientific ideal is the domination of nature by means of putting into play the principle of destruction or death. Imagine, dear unknown friend, efforts and discoveries in the opposite direction, in the direction of construction or life. Imagine not an explosion, but rather the blossoming out of a constructive atom bomb. It is not too difficult to imagine, because each little acorn is such a constructive bomb, and the oak is only the visible result of the slow explosion or blossoming out of this bomb. Imagine it, and you will have the ideal of the great work, or the idea of the tree of life. The image itself of the tree comprises the negation of the technical and mechanical element. It is the living synthesis of celestial light and elements of the earth. Not only is it the synthesis of heaven and earth, it constantly synthesizes that which descends from above and that which ascends from below. Now, the ideal of Hermeticism is contrary to that of science. Instead of aspiring to power over the fortresses of nature by means of the destruction of matter, Hermeticism aspires to conscious participation with the constructive forces of the world on the basis of an alliance and a cordial communion with them. Science wants to compel nature to obedience to the will of man such as it is. Hermeticism, or the philosophy of sacred magic, on the contrary wants to purify, illumine and change the will of and nature of man in order to bring them into harmony with the creative principle of nature, natura naturans, and to render them capable of receiving its willingly bestowed revelation. The great work as an ideal is therefore the state of the human being who is in peace, alliance, harmony and collaboration with life. This is the fruit of the tree of life. But does not the Bible say that the approach to the tree of life is defended, and that at the east of the Garden of Eden God placed the cherubim and a flaming sword which turned every way to guard the way to the tree of life? Genesis 3:24. Yes, it is defended, but the defense is not absolute and general, it is specific. Read what the Bible says here. Then the Lord God said, Behold, the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil. And now, lest he put forth his hand and take also of the tree of life, and eat and live forever. Genesis 3:22. Now it is a matter here of defense against putting forth the hand and taking from the tree of life. And it is this and only this that the flaming sword of the Garden of Eden prevents. Putting forth the hand and taking, this is the motif, the method, and the ideal of science. It is the will to power underlying the scientific attitude which is prevented by the flaming sword of the Guardian of Eden from repeating the act committed with respect to the tree of knowledge of good and evil. But the motif, method, and ideal of Hermeticism is contrary to that of science. The will to serve underlies the fundamental Hermetic attitude. Instead of putting forward the hand to take, the human being opens his mind, his heart, and his will to receive that which will be graciously bestowed upon him. The inspiration, illumination, and intuition that he seeks are not so much conquests accomplished by his will, they are rather gifts from above, preceded by the efforts of the human will endeavouring to become worthy. The flaming sword of the Guardian of Eden is a weapon of divine magic. This means to say that it is essentially a yes and not a no. It is essentially constructive and not destructive. In other words, it invites, encourages, and directs all those who are worthy, all that which is worthy in each person, to the benefits of the tree of life, and it forbids, discourages, and sends away all those who are unworthy, and also all that which is unworthy in each person. The flaming sword is a benediction to those who seek the tree of eternal love, which is the tree of life, and at the same time, by the very fact that it blesses, the flaming force prohibits those who seek the tree of life in order to take possession of its fruits. The sword of the holy Guardian of Eden is always active in the spiritual life of humanity. It calls to seekers and it repulses thieves. Thanks to its Hermeticism, the millennial-old tradition of uninterrupted pursuit of the ideal of the great work exists, in spite of all the chimera, all the illusions, and all the forms of charlatanism, conscious and unconscious, which accompany this pursuit. The sword of the holy Guardian of Eden works the magical revelation of the tree of life, for everyone, without distinction. It is the magical words stirring ablaze in human souls' ardent desire for the great work, the miraculous life. It will not break a bruised reed or quench a smouldering wick, Matthew 12:20, because its mission is divine. and it is characteristic of the divine not only to save every droplet of sincerity and every spark of love, but also to make them grow and spread. Because in spite of all corruption that historical experience brings to the light of day, in totality nothing is corrupt. The traditional teaching of the Church that nature is wounded but not destroyed, natura vulnerata non deleta, is absolutely true. The tree of life is the unity or synthesis of consciousness, force, and matter. 3 is its number, because it reflects the unity of the Holy Trinity. It is at the same time the unity of mysticism, gnosis, and magic. This is why one should not separate them. The Empress, as a symbol of sacred magic, contains within itself gnosis and mysticism, or the high priestess and the magician. These arcana are incomprehensible when one takes them separately. In general, all the arcana of the tarot are comprehensible only when considered as a whole. But it so happens that in human consciousness one separates the inseparable, in forgetting the unity. One takes a branch of the tree and cultivates it as if it exists without the trunk. The branch can have a long life, but it degenerates. It is thus that in forgetting gnosis and mysticism, magic has been taken separately, which, being a branch separated from its trunk, ceased to be sacred magic and became arbitrary or personal magic. This latter mechanized to a certain degree and became what one understands as ceremonial magic, which flourished from the time of the Renaissance until the 17th century. It was, par excellence, the magic of the humanists, i.e. it was no longer divine magic, but human magic. It no longer served God, but man. Its ideal became the power of man over visible and invisible nature. Later, invisible nature was also forgotten. Visible nature was concentrated upon alone, with the aim of subjugating it to the human will. It is in this way that technological and industrial science originated. It is the continuation of the ceremonial magic of the humanists, stripped of its occult element, just as the former is the continuation of sacred magic, but deprived of its Gnostic and mystical element. What I am saying here is perfectly in accord with what Papou and Eliphas Levi thought, concerning which one cannot say that he was speaking without knowledge of the matter. For Papou said, quote, "Ceremonial magic is an operation by which man seeks, through the play of natural forces, to compel the invisible powers of diverse orders to act according to what he requires of them. To this end he seizes them, he surprises them, as it were, in projecting, through the effect of correspondences which suppose the unity of creation, forces of which he himself is not master, but to which he can open extraordinary outlets. Ceremonial magic is of an order absolutely identical to our industrial science. Our power is almost nothing alongside that of steam, electricity, and dynamite, but in opposing them by appropriate combinations to natural forces as powerful as themselves, we concentrate them, we accumulate them, we compel them to transport or to smash weights which would annihilate us." Papou, Traité élémentaire de sciences occultes, Paris, 1988, pages 425 to 426. What more is there to say? One can perhaps add another statement by Papou, defining the relationship between the scientific mage or occultist and the sorcerer, as follows: "The sorcerer is to the occultist as the worker is to the engineer." Papou, page 68. The sorcerer is therefore only an amateur occultist. Just as contemporary technological science is the direct continuation of ceremonial magic, contemporary profane art is merely a continuation of gnosis and magic which have lost sight of mysticism and become separated from it. Because art seeks to reveal and applies itself to do this in a magical manner. The ancient mysteries were only sacred art, being in the background conscious of mysticism and gnosis. But after forgetting this background, or so to say, after this background receded too far into the background, there remained a gnosis or a revelationism, deprived at root of mystical discipline and experience. In this way creative art originated, and the mysteries became theatre, revelationary mantras became verses, hymns became songs, and revelationary pantomimic movements became dances, whilst cosmic myths gave way to belles lettres. Art, being separated from the living organism of the unity of the tetragrammaton, is necessarily removed from gnosis as well as from sacred magic, from which it springs and to which it owes its substance and the sap of its life. The pure revelation of gnosis has become more and more a game of the imagination, and the power of magic has degenerated more and more into aesthetics. Richard Wagner understood this and wanted to remedy it. The work of Wagner followed the aim of the reintegration of art, to effect reunion with gnosis and mysticism so that it becomes sacred magic again. Josephin Pelledin endeavoured to do the same in France. He even had dazzling success, but this was short-lived, for reasons which he well understood subsequently. Silence is the indispensable climate for all revelation. Noise renders it absolutely impossible. The religious life, as everyone knows, is not exempt from decadence. When it ceases to be founded in mysticism, illumined by gnosis, and actuated by sacred magic. It grows cold without the fire of mysticism. It clouds over without the light of gnosis, and becomes impotent without the power of sacred magic. There remains then only theological legalism supported by moral legalism, hence the origin of the religion of the scribes and Pharisees at the time of the New Testament. This is the twilight which precedes its night, its death. Faith is the experience of divine breath. Hope is the experience of divine light, and love is the experience of divine fire. There is no authentic and sincere religious life without faith, hope, and love. But there is no faith, hope, and love without mystical experience, or, what is the same thing, without grace. No intellectual argument can awaken faith. What it can do at best is to eliminate obstacles, misunderstandings and prejudices, and thus help to establish the state of interior silence necessary for the experience of the divine breath. But faith itself is the divine breath whose origin is found neither in logical reasoning, nor in aesthetic impression, nor in human moral action. The divine and flaming word shines in the world of the silence of the soul and moves it. This movement is living faith, therefore real and authentic, and its light is hope or illumination, whilst all springs from the divine fire which is love or union with God. The three ways or stages of traditional mysticism, purification, illumination, and union, are those of the experience of divine breath or faith, divine light or hope, and divine fire or love. These three fundamental experiences of the revelation of the divine constitute the triangle of life, for no spirit, no soul, and equally no body would be able to live if entirely deprived of all love, all hope, and all faith. They would then be deprived of all vital elan, the vital elan advanced by Henry Bergson as the general impulse behind evolution. But what else could this be but some form of love, hope, and faith operating at the basis of all life? It is because in the beginning was the Word, and all things were made through him, John 1:1-3, and it is because the primordial Word still vibrates in all that lives, that the world still lives, and has the vital elan which is nothing other than love, hope, and faith inspired from the beginning by the creative Word. In this sense Browning was right in having said, nature is supernatural, for its supernatural origin still manifests itself in its vital elan. To want to live. Good Lord, what a profession of faith, what a manifestation of hope, and what ardour of love. Love, hope, and faith are at one at the same time the essence of mysticism, gnosis, and sacred magic. Faith is the source of magic power, and all the miracles spoken of in the Gospels are attributable to it. The revelation, all the revelations of gnosis have only one aim, to give, to maintain, and to increase hope. The book that the high priestess holds on her knees is written so that hope may continue unceasingly. For all revelation which does not give hope is useless and superfluous. Mysticism is fire without reflection. It is union with the divine in love. It is the primary source of all life, including religious, artistic, and intellectual life. Without it, everything becomes pure and simple technique. Religion becomes a body of techniques of which the scribes and Pharisees are the engineers. It becomes legalistic. Art becomes a body of techniques, be they traditional or innovative, a field of imitation or experiences. Lastly, science becomes a body of techniques of power over nature. But the arcanum of sacred magic, the Empress, calls us to take another way. It calls us to the way of regeneration instead of that of degeneration. It invites us to demechanize all that which has become solely intellectual, aesthetic, and moral technique. One has to demechanize in order to become a mage. For sacred magic is through and through life, that life which is revealed in the mystery of blood. May our problems become so many cries of the blood of the heart. May our words be born by blood, and may our actions be as effusions of blood. This is how one becomes a mage. One becomes a mage by becoming essential as the blood is. Eliphas Levi puts as the subtitle to the chapter devoted to the third arcanum of the tarot in his Transcendental Magic, its doctrine and ritual, Plenitudo Vocis. His choice is more than happy, it is inspired. Indeed, fullness of voice. Could one better describe the essence itself of sacred magic? Yes, it is fullness of voice with which sacred magic is concerned. It is the voice full of blood. It is the blood which becomes voice. It is being in which there is nothing mechanical and which is entirely living. The third arcanum of the tarot, being the arcanum of sacred magic, is by this very fact the arcanum of generation. For generation is only an aspect of sacred magic. If sacred magic is the union of two wills, human and divine, from which a miracle results, generation itself also presupposes the trinity of the generator, the generant, and the generated. Now, the generated is the miracle resulting from the union of the principles of generator and generant. Whether it is a matter of a new idea, a work of art, the birth of a child is not important. It is always the same law of generation which operates. It is always the same arcanum, that of fecundity, which is in play, and it is always the same mystery of the incarnation of the Word which is the divine prototype here. We have said above that sacred magic is life such as it was before the fall. As life is always generative, the arcanum of sacred magic is at the same time that of generation before the fall, vertical generation, from a higher plane to a lower one, instead of horizontal generation, which is accomplished on a single plane. The formula of this mystery is well known. Et incarnatus est de Spirito Sancto ex Maria Virgin. It contains the trinity of the generator above, of the generant below, and the generated, or the Holy Spirit, the Holy Virgin, and the God-Man. It is at the same time the formula of sacred magic in general, because it expresses the mystery of the union of divine will and human will in the element of blood. The blood, in its triple sense, mystical, gnostic, and magical, is the scepter or power of sacred magic. At this point, dear unknown friend, I shall withdraw and leave you alone with your angel. It is not fitting that my human voice arrogates the right of uttering things which are a more profound continuation of what is outlined above.